How's it going, everybody? Ed Ricker here, and this is a video about some filters for the DJI Mavic 3. These are filters from Freewell, the wide angle and the anamorphic lens filter pack, which also can be used with ND filters that are included. This is a really awesome kit. Now you have to choose which one you want to use at any given point in time, the wide angle or the anamorphic lens filter, but they both have their uses and I really like them. I've already used them in a couple professional situations. First of all, the wide angle filter just kind of does what it says it does. It increases your field of view of the camera. So normally the DJI Mavic 3 shoots around an 84 degree field of view, and this filter is marketed as being 125 degrees of field of view, which is a big increase. So basically you can get closer to an object while still seeing the entire object, or you could just see more of the landscape that you're shooting. In my case, if I'm shooting the front of a house that's under construction, but the street is narrow and there's a house immediately across the street, that means that I can't really back up the drone too much before I start running into the house across the street. So a wide angle filter will allow me to shoot the entirety of the front of a house or a structure without having to back up so far. And also just because of the wider field of view, it allows you to get some more creative options. Very wide angle aerial photography and videography is kind of a unique look because a lot of the camera drones we use don't have that wide of a field of view. When I review the wide angle footage, I do see also there's a little bit of warping and fisheyeness to the footage. So if you look at the horizon in some of these wide angle shots, you can see the horizon has a curvature. That's not the natural curvature of the Earth, but rather the wide angle lens warping the image a little bit. So there's a little bit of give and take here. You get your wide angle, but you also get a little bit of a fisheyeness to your footage. And then we have the anamorphic lens filter, which is my favorite. It allows you to get more of a cinematic aspect ratio. Placing it onto the Mavic 3's camera will record footage and pictures that are a little bit squeezed horizontally. So everything looks a little bit like narrow and thin. It does require a video editing program to desqueeze that footage, and I can show you how, but it essentially creates a wider cinematic aspect ratio, very movie-like. So you kind of have those black bars on the top and the bottom, and some people like that look. I mean, it's not for everybody, but it's a certain look that might be recognizable when you're watching movies. Another thing that's very interesting about anamorphic lens filters and anamorphic lenses in general is they create very interesting light sun flares. So either a bright light at night or during the day, sun reflections, you see these very interesting blue horizontal lens flares. And you've seen these in movies, you've seen them in TV shows and stuff, usually like futuristic style TV and movies because it kind of has a futuristic look. And so to be able to get that out of your footage is pretty awesome with the DJI Mavic 3. One thing I did notice with the Freewell anamorphic lens filter, when I'm shooting video or photos, I realize that the color temperature changes. And I brought that up with Freewell too, and they said that this is due to the designing of the coating process on the lens in order to get those nice blue lens flares. So it's kind of a compromise. It changes the color temperature a little bit, which we can, color correct on the computer if we need to. But that's just because they're trying to get those blue lens flares coming out of those shiny and bright spots of the image. Now for both of these DJI Mavic 3 filters from Freewell, you can add ND filters over the front. And that's pretty cool too. So I think this is the first wide angle and anamorphic lens offering for the DJI Mavic 3 where you can also add ND filters on the front. So they give us an ND8, ND16, ND32, and ND64 that you can add to either one. It actually adds a little bit more weight to the front of the camera. So you're probably interested to see if this, DJI Mavic 3 boots up and calibrates the gimbal fine. It does. I'm surprised it does, but it does. And I haven't had any issues flying around fast with either of these filters on. You can't put the gimbal protective covering over the gimbal when you're storing it in your bag with these filters on because they stick out too much. Now, I will admit that the wide angle lens filter, because it's so wide, when you put an ND filter over the front, you do see a little vignetting on the side. It may not be something you notice, and if you do notice it and it bothers you, you can always crop in a couple % to get rid of it. I talked to Freewell about this, and they said that due to the load limitations of the Mavic 3, the weight and size of the lenses are limited. So that's why we are getting a little bit of the vignetting on the side, just because they can't make the lens filter any wider without maybe having some issues with that gimbal calibration. They also said that with the aperture at f2.8, the problem is almost wholly improved. So it seems like if we close the aperture more, that becomes more apparent. The wider it is, the more shallow depth of field we have, and the more blurry those sides get, and the less apparent the vignetting is. All these filters also come with a filter guide. It's like a paper cheat sheet to kind of see what ND filters you might need for various times of the day. So if you don't understand ND or neutral density filter usage, read through these little pamphlets and you can kind of get an idea of what ND filter to use when. For both of these Mavic 3 filters, the telephoto lens of the Mavic 3, the secondary camera, basically is just clear glass. No effect on that one. Okay, so we are in Premiere right now. This is my video editing software of choice. And we have our source, and then we have our program windows here. What I'm going to go to is click on the clip and go to Effect Controls. And then we're going to go under Motion and look for Scale. And this is how we're going to de-squeeze our footage. So right now, everything looks a little bit squeezed in from the sides. It's a 16:9 image, but it's not truly 16:9, visuals. And so what we can do is go over here, expand scale by clicking the little arrow there, and then we're going to uncheck uniform scale. We're going to leave width alone, but we're going to scale height from 100 to 87. All right, so in a 16:9 program aspect ratio here, this is our sequence aspect ratio, 16:9, we now have our black strips at the top and the bottom, and this is how we're going to then play the video. So if I were to play it from the start, make it go full screen, and so this is not the extreme, aspect ratio that you might be thinking of when you see like a 2.39/1 aspect ratio, which is very cinematic, very, very wide. That might look something more like, if we're looking at scale height, that might be more like 67 or something, but that's actually way too wide. Now we're stretched the wrong direction. So we've actually stretched it out too far. So for this particular lens filter, which is a 1.18 anamorphic lens, we're going to go with 87, and that is going to produce a decent black bar on the top and the bottom, nothing extreme. Now, if we do want to get more of a black bar on the top and the bottom, we can go into crop. We can add crop as an effect, and then we can just crop in the top, like 15% and 15%, and get something really extreme like that. We're cutting off usable footage, though, usable information and visuals, but that's how you would get something much more extreme. However, we're not going to do that right now. We would just want to showcase what the filter can do, and there you got it. All right, so I have 3 clips here. This is the DJI Mavic 3 without any filters at all. This is just the way it shoots standard. And then we're going to go to the next clip. This is the wide angle filter. So I'm going to go back and forth, and I'm using, I think it was this building as my center spot for lining these up. I just took the drone straight up and down both times and lined them up as perfect as I could. So it's pretty obvious that I've got the positioning perfect, and you can then really see how much field of view you're gaining. Now, I don't do any sort of technical analysis on this to see whether this is really 125 degrees and this is 84, like if that's really the difference. I haven't done that. But I do like what I see in terms of how much more field of view I'm gaining with that. So this is very useful. I mean, look, I can see pretty much the entirety of Raleigh without having to back up so much. Whereas this one, I see the buildings all right, but I'm missing some other buildings on the left and the right. And then over to the right, we have the next clip, and this is anamorphic. And I'm interested to see, so first of all, you can see immediately the color temperature change. So it's more yellow for sure, greenish yellow. And I wonder, let's see, if I add lumetri control and white balance off of a building that I think might be white, yeah, that helps. A little bit. Could probably do a little better. Yeah. That's pretty good. Maybe even too much. Might be too heavy-handed. Either way, I'll figure that out. But I've done a little color correcting that quick, and I was able to get this pretty close. So the whole color temperature change isn't the end of the world as long as you know how to color correct. So let's look at this then. We're looking at this building. We can see it. We're looking at this edge of this building, and we can see it. We're going to go back to the wide angle. So we see the entirety of the Raleigh Convention Center, but either way, we see the entirety of it now. And we see this building and this crane, which we did not see before. So that is definitely a wider angle than anamorphic. So we're going from anamorphic to wide angle. We do see more. We see also a little bit of the train track here, and we see a lot more of the train track here. So look at this though. We're going to go back to standard DJI Mavic 3 with no filter. The convention center is completely gone. This building is essentially gone. And we see very little train track. So going from there to anamorphic, it looks like we didn't get a whole lot of vertical field of view, but we got a lot of horizontal field of view. So this isn't just reshaping your image, you know, to make it look like it has black bars in the top and the bottom or cropping like that. It really is taking in a different field of view and a different aspect ratio. And as long as you know how to scale the height correctly to 87%, yeah, this is a very cool effect that we have going on with the anamorphic filter. I do like the new case design for the DJI Mavic 3 lenses. It's a little more hardy, and it's not so scratchable as their previous lenses. So I use the neutral density and polarizer options a lot from Freewell for my Mavic 3, and you can already tell the front is all scratched up. Now, the DJI Mavic 3, I'm not sure exactly how, but it knows when you're using a wide angle filter. There's actually a notification up on the screen that says wide angle filter in use. And sometimes that limits what you can do in terms of like quick shots and stuff like that. DJI Mavic 3's firmware over the last couple months has been updated to allow for more quick shots to be used when you're using a wide angle filter. So if you don't have like the latest firmware or update of the Mavic 3, I suggest you do that before or as you buy this, because you want to make sure that you have the full functionality of the Mavic 3 when you're using a wide angle filter or an anamorphic filter. Freewell also sent me some filters for the Air 2S by DJI, and they're not technically anamorphic lens filters, but they do produce that same interesting lens flare that we're talking about. And so what they sent me are a gold and a blue filter, as well as one that includes a variable ND filter in front of it. Now, you probably won't use these on every single shoot that you do, but it's kind of cool to have those as like an effects filter that you might use for certain projects or certain shots. It's something to be creative and to play with, but it may not be something you always use. The fact that the DJI Mavic 3 anamorphic lens filter has not only those cool lens flares, but also the anamorphic property of having the aspect ratio more cinematic. That's the key, and that's what I really like about it. And you can match the DJI Mavic 3's anamorphic footage with maybe your handheld camera's anamorphic footage if you have an anamorphic lens for a Panasonic GH6 or something. Now with the Air 2S filters, I like them. I think it's going to be more like a case-by-case basis whether or not I use them. That horizontal lens flare can be distracting maybe in some ways, but in some other ways it might be really eye-catching. It's up to you. I also like that you have the gold and the blue version. So if you're using the gold version for some sort of situation, you might want to switch to blue. Maybe even use them both in the same video. I don't know. It's cool to experiment with. With the other filters we're talking about, the wide angle and the anamorphic with the Mavic 3, those have those nice ND filters over the front. So as long as you can use them and make sure that you can mitigate the vignetting that you see on the wide angle filter, you should be good to go. I don't see any vignetting on the anamorphic, and I think it's just because it's not quite as wide as the wide angle. You know, it is wider, obviously, we just saw, but not quite as wide. Thanks so much to Freewell for sending these to me. They've always been a good supporter of the channel for almost, I guess, 5 years now. And I'm looking forward to reviewing more that they have in the future. So until next time, thanks for watching and happy flying.